Usually, like when we look at a massive physical transformation, we totally expect this dramatic, cinematic, night and day visual shift, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like the classic Rocky training montage.
Exactly. We want the before and after photos where the person is just completely unrecognizable.
Yeah.
We expect the scale to show a sudden drop of, you know, 30, maybe 40 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, there is a deeply ingrained human expectation that an elite athletic evolution should be glaringly obvious to the naked eye. We crave that visual validation.
Right, because the numbers on the scale provide a very simple, digestible narrative for hard work.
Yeah.
But then you analyze the journey of Conor the Destroyer Benn, the WBA Continental Welterweight Champion.
And that expectation just gets flipped entirely upside down.
Totally. Because between his early days of literally eating burgers and like heavy curries right before a fight and his current status as an absolute elite level talent, there is a grand total of 2 pounds of difference on the scale.
It's just 2 pounds. It's wild to even think about.
A 2-pound shift.
It really highlights the ultimate paradox of true athletic performance, doesn't it? A mere 2-pound difference on a bathroom scale completely masks a total fundamental rebuild of a human being.
And today, that is our exact mission for this deep dive. We are looking at a comprehensive breakdown of Conor Benn's training system. This was originally detailed in Men's Health by Dan Lawrence, Matchroom Boxing's head of performance.
Which is such a fantastic source, but we should probably frame the boundaries of this deep dive early on.
Good call, yeah. Go ahead.
Right, so this is not a fitness tutorial. We are not outlining a step-by-step workout routine for, anyone looking to go hit a heavy bag in their garage.
Yeah, please do not just go out and try to copy these exact lifts without a coach.
Exactly. Instead, we are breaking down the underlying mechanics of performance. We are exploring the physiological energy systems, the strategic architecture of a fight camp, and those specific daily habits that separate the ordinary from the elite.
So the goal is to isolate those mechanics. So you, listening right now, can apply the underlying logic to your own pursuit of peak performance, whatever your specific arena happens to be.
Right. So to really grasp the mechanics of this transformation, we have to examine the catalyst. Like, how does a fighter recognize that their current operating system is fundamentally broken?
Well, for Conor Benn, the reality check hiding behind those 2 pounds was delivered forcefully inside the ring.
Progress usually demands a severe shock to the system, and for Benn, that shock arrived in December 2017 during a bout against Cedric Peno.
Oh man, that fight. In the very first round, Benn was knocked down twice.
Yeah, hitting the canvas twice in the opening 3 minutes is the kind of visceral feedback that, well, it forces a serious existential crisis.
He even admitted it was a touch-and-go win that made him question whether he even belonged in the sport of boxing, right?
He did. I mean, he had incredible heart and the raw gusto to fight, obviously. But the underlying biological machinery just wasn't developed to support him at an elite level.
So that's when Dan Lawrence steps in to take over his physical preparation. And his immediate assessment was highly critical, but very accurate.
Lawrence basically realized Benn did not understand the physiological requirements of being a professional athlete. But Lawrence doesn't just, throw Benn into a grueling new workout routine to build mental toughness.
No, he actually hits the brakes on everything. He wants to establish a rigid clinical baseline first.
Right. He puts the fighter through a battery of high-level performance tests. He starts with VO2 max testing.
And for those unfamiliar, VO2 max measures the absolute maximum rate at which your body can consume and utilize oxygen during intense exercise.
It essentially calculates the cellular ceiling of your aerobic capacity. Or, as Lawrence puts it, he needed to know the literal size of the engine.
Okay, that makes total sense. But then he orders DEX-A scans to map out lean muscle mass and, get this, bone mineral density. And here is where I have to say, okay, let's unpack this. I got to push back on the methodology a bit.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, why on earth does a professional boxer need a bone mineral density scan? I mean, boxing is fundamentally about having the grit and the rotational power to punch hard, right? Mapping out bone density feels overly clinical for a combat sport.
See, what's fascinating here is how that clinical data directly dictates the limits of that grit. A DEXA scan provides a high-resolution map of your skeletal armor.
Skeletal armor. Okay, I like that term.
Right. Because in a sport where your body is constantly generating and absorbing massive amounts of kinetic energy, the density of your bones dictates your structural integrity.
So it tells a performance coach exactly how much sheer force the athlete can safely absorb before a bone fractures or a joint just, destabilizes completely.
Exactly. Before you build the weapon, you have to know the exact load-bearing capacity of the materials you're working with.
I look at the old version of Conor Benn like someone trying to run a next-generation high-speed software program on a clunky, aesthetic laptop from 2010.
Ha, yes. That is a perfect analogy.
It might have a cool, intimidating sticker on the lid, but there's no processing power under the keyboard, you know?
And if a coach doesn't know the limits of the hardware, the VO2 max ceiling, the skeletal density, any software they try to install will inevitably cause a crash.
Meaning the training program itself.
Right. Programming a high-performance athlete based on guesswork leads straight to injury. The baseline is non-negotiable.
Which brings us to the first massive hurdle in this rebuild. Because once the baseline was mapped out, Ben's personal motivations completely clashed with the functional reality of boxing.
Oh, big time. His goals were driven almost entirely by aesthetics.
Yeah, this is a classic trap in combat sports. The desire to look intimidating often overrides the need to be effective.
Totally. Before Lawrence took the reins, Ben was engaging in what is essentially a bro sesh in the gym.
A bro sesh, yeah. He was doing static isolation bodybuilding routines. He would sit on a padded bench and do seated shoulder presses and seated chest presses.
And his explicit motivation was that he wanted to look like Mike Tyson. He wanted the thick, jacked neck, and he wanted to, quote, look good on the scales.
This raises a really important question, though. What is the actual mechanical difference between looking strong and being functionally explosive?
Well, when an athlete sits on a padded bench to perform a heavy shoulder press, they are actively disengaging their core and their lower body.
They're isolating the anterior deltoids and triceps to trigger muscle hypertrophy, right? Muscle growth.
Exactly, but they are completely ignoring the kinetic chain.
Because throwing a devastating punch doesn't start in the shoulder at all. It starts with the foot driving force into the floor.
Pushing that kinetic energy up through the calf into the thigh.
Right, rotating through the hips, transferring across the oblique muscles in the core, snapping through the shoulder, and finally exiting through the fist. Sitting on a bench just short-circuits that entire energy transfer system.
It does. So Lawrence navigated that clash of priorities with a very calculated compromise. He told Ben that over a number of camps, he would program the training to deliver the physical size and the aesthetic intimidation Ben wanted.
But in exchange, Ben had to commit entirely to building explosive power. And Lawrence's specific definition of explosive power is critical to understand here.
Yeah, it goes way beyond just hitting a heavy bag with force. He defined explosiveness as the measurable ability to run fast, sprint, jump, change direction instantly, and ultimately land the knockout punch.
It requires dynamic, instantaneous movement across every plane of motion.
Because in the context of boxing, raw strength without immense speed is a complete liability. An athlete can possess world-class static pushing power, but if it takes them a full second to deploy that power, a skilled opponent will easily slip the punch.
Bridging the gap from seated shoulder presses to dynamic explosiveness requires a fundamental shift in the geometry of the exercises, honestly.
And the ultimate metric of this shift wasn't a bigger bicep measurement. It was Ben's performance on the trap bar deadlift.
Oh man, the numbers here are insane. He was dominating that specific lift. The data shows Ben ripping 170 kilos off the floor for 3 reps.
That represented his top load, functioning at roughly 85% of his 1-rep maximum.
Let's break down the physics of that specific lift really quick.
Yeah.
First, the trap bar itself. Unlike a traditional straight barbell where the weight sits in front of your shins and strains the lower back, a trap bar is a hexagonal frame that you step inside.
Which is huge for safety. It shifts the center of gravity directly in line with your midfoot.
Right. This allows a taller athlete or boxer who really needs to protect their lumbar spine to focus entirely on vertical leg drive.
And at the time of these lifts, Ben weighed around 11 stone or roughly 154 pounds. 170 kilos is about 374 pounds.
So he was vertically driving 2.4 times his own body weight. But the weight itself is actually secondary to the velocity here.
Yeah, they track the speed of the bar, measuring it at 0.32 to 0.5 meters per second.
That velocity metric is the critical mechanism of adaptation. I mean, moving 2.4 times your body weight is an impressive display of raw strength alone.
But moving that mass at half a meter per second requires an incredible rate of force development. This is purely a neurological adaptation.
It trains the central nervous system to recruit massive bundles of fast-twitch muscle fibers in just a fraction of a second to violently accelerate the load upwards.
And the translation to the boxing ring becomes incredibly clear when you think about it that way.
Yeah, if your nervous system is conditioned to instantly and violently accelerate 170 kilos from a dead stop, the moment you throw a punch wearing a 10-ounce glove, your brain fires with that same instantaneous motor unit recruitment.
You function less like a coiled spring and more like an electrical capacitor discharging all its stored energy in a single violent millisecond.
You are literally rewiring the engine to deliver maximum output on command.
However, you can't just walk into a gym and attempt to move 2.4 times your body weight at high velocity without severely injuring yourself.
No, absolutely not. The architecture required to safely build up to that peak performance over a highly compressed 10-week fight camp requires incredibly precise load management.
Programming an athlete for peak performance without breaking their connective tissue in the process is a massive logistical puzzle.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture of fight camp architecture, how does Lawrence approach those 10 weeks?
He approaches it in highly structured phases. The camp always begins with general physical preparedness, or the GPP phase, which spans the first 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, to visualize the GPP phase on the gym floor, it relies on low to moderate weight loads with higher repetitions, right?
Exactly. Lawrence programs complex movements like landmine squats.
In a landmine squat, for anyone who hasn't done one end of the barbell is anchored to the floor, while the athlete holds the other end at chest level.
And this forces the athlete to squat in a slight undersit path, which demands immense anterior core stability.
While also protecting the shoulder joints from the heavy compression of a traditional back squat. They also utilize dumbbell floor presses and heavy upper body pulling exercises.
The underlying goal of GPP is tissue preparation. It's about building a robust foundation of joint stability and ligament strength.
It's the equivalent of trying to install a 900 horsepower engine into a car chassis where none of the bolts have been tightened yet.
Yes. If you skip the foundational tightening, the torque of the engine will literally rip the frame apart.
I always relate this to the post-lockdown gym rush. You don't just walk back into the gym after months off and do a 5x5 200-kilo back squat without crumbling.
Exactly. Lawrence emphasizes that an athlete must earn the right to progress before they ever touch max velocity lifting.
And earning that right also requires intense management of the athlete's energy systems.
Very true. During the GPP phase, Lawrence incorporates conditioning tools like heavy farmer's carries and the assault bike, but he operates with a very strict warning regarding cardiovascular fatigue.
Right. He monitors exactly how depleted the athlete is getting. Lawrence notes that if you put a boxer on an assault bike and they are, quote, falling off the cliff, meaning their aerobic and anaerobic energy systems are completely exhausted, continuing the workout is actively harmful.
Yeah, if the athlete falls off the cliff on the very first set, their physical form degrades, lactic acid accumulation overwhelms the muscles, and sets 2, 3, and 4 simply become junk volume.
Junk volume represents physical output that causes central nervous system fatigue without providing any actual stimulus for adaptation. It actively impairs the recovery process.
And in a constrained 10-week camp, every single calorie expended must yield a specific, measurable return on investment.
This strict economy of energy expenditure means that traditional bodybuilding phases are entirely discarded.
It makes complete sense that they skip the hypertrophy or muscle building phase entirely in a tight 10-week window.
Well, yeah, if you're managing weight for a specific weight class, trying to pack on mass requires a caloric surplus, which fundamentally contradicts the goal of making weight.
The math simply does not align. So the moment those initial 2 to 3 weeks of general physical preparedness are complete, they bypass hypertrophy entirely.
And transition directly into the strength and power blocks. That is the exact window where the high-velocity, 170-kilo trap bar deadlifts are deployed.
The foundation is solidified, and they immediately begin sharpening it into a neurological weapon.
Bringing this down to the micro level, we have the 10-week macro view, but the daily execution is just as calculated.
Oh, absolutely. Analyzing a single Tuesday for an elite fighter reveals a masterclass in sequencing.
So how does a team structure a single day to maximize these complex energy systems? And just as importantly, how do they physically fuel that output?
Well, the daily schedule is dictated entirely by central nervous system management. Taking a standard training day for Ben, assuming it doesn't involve a grueling sparring session, the work begins at 7 a.m. with road work.
This is steady-state aerobic track running designed to maintain the base cardiovascular engine.
Then at 1 p.m., Ben shifts to the boxing gym with his head coach, Tony Sims, focusing purely on technical skill acquisition.
So this is the intricate footwork, the head movement, the complex striking mechanics.
Right. And finally, at 5 p.m., he links up with Dan Lawrence for the heavy strength and conditioning block.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The chronological sequencing there is highly deliberate. Notice how the highly technical, skill-based cognitive work of boxing occurs midday.
Yeah, at 1 p.m., his brain is fully awake, his synapses are firing efficiently, and his nervous system is primed but not yet exhausted. It allows for optimal motor learning.
And the raw, high-load physical exertion that absolutely drains the central neurotransmitters is intentionally pushed to the very end of the day at 5 p.m.
Because if Ben attempted to violently pull 170 kilos off the floor at 7 a.m., his central nervous system would be completely fried.
His brain simply wouldn't have the electrical capacity to learn complex rotational footwork at 1 p.m. It makes you think about how we prioritize our own daily energy systems. Like, are you doing your most complex cognitive work when your brain is actually primed for it?
It's a great point. And managing that sequential fatigue requires premium fuel. To support this massive output, performance chef Dan Sargent completely overhauled Ben's nutritional intake.
Yes. The era of pre-fight curries was finally replaced by a highly rigid, 3,000 calorie per day pescatarian diet.
The protein sources are exclusively fish. We're talking salmon, prawns, sea-based, tuna steaks, alongside plant-based proteins like tofu and tempeh.
And they even utilize things like beetroot brownies and chickpea blondies for carbohydrates. Beetroot brownies.
Hey, whatever works, right? The physiological logic behind the pescatarian shift is heavily rooted in reducing systemic inflammation.
Because heavy red meats require a significant amount of the body's energy simply to digest. And they can trigger higher inflammatory markers.
Exactly. Boxing creates constant, severe microtrauma in the muscle tissue. By utilizing fish and plant proteins, which digest more efficiently and contain high levels of anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids, the diet accelerates the cellular recovery process.
Rather than burdening the digestive tract, it's brilliant. The nutritional strategy also incorporates a fascinating psychological tactic right around the weigh-in.
Oh, the weigh-in hack. Making weight in combat sports is historically brutal, often involving severe dehydration and carbohydrate restriction.
It usually leaves fighters looking gaunt and just completely hollowed out on the scale.
But Lawrence and his team reverse engineer the weight cut to allow Ben a small, calculated intake of carbohydrates the day before he steps on the scale.
And when those carbohydrates enter the system, the muscles pull in glycogen and intracellular water. This means when Conor Benn steps onto the scale, his muscles are physically full.
He achieves that jacked, intimidating aesthetic he always wanted, but now it is strategically weaponized to gain a psychological edge over a depleted opponent.
He steps off the scale feeling structurally solid and dangerous, rather than feeling like a fragile, dried-out shell.
Yet the extreme discipline of the camp does not vanish the moment the final bell rings. The post-camp reality is governed by rules just as strict as the preparation phase.
Right, because during a 10-week camp, there are 0 deviations, no off-menu meals. But immediately after fight night, Lawrence grants Ben a 21-day window.
For 3 weeks, he can eat at restaurants, socialize, and consume the foods he's been craving. However, there is a rigid, non-negotiable boundary attached to this freedom.
The 12-stone upper limit.
Lawrence understands the metabolic math. If an athlete goes from tracking every single calorie and burning immense amounts of daily energy to suddenly dropping their physical expenditure by 90% while eating off menu, weight gain is rapid and aggressive.
So the 12-stone ceiling is a hard boundary. Ben can enjoy the 21 days, but the instant his weight hits that 12-stone mark, the off-menu eating is terminated.
That boundary is designed to protect the integrity of the next fight camp. If an athlete balloons past their designated upper limit, the critical first 2 to 3 weeks of the next camp are entirely wasted.
Instead of utilizing the GPP phase to build joint stability and prepare the tissues for high-velocity deadlifts, the coach has to spend that time desperately trying to burn off excess adipose tissue.
Exactly. By enforcing the 12-stone limit, they ensure that the athlete's baseline never degrades past the point of structural efficiency.
If he hits the limit on day 10, they immediately intervene, clean up the nutritional input, and reintroduce energy expenditure.
So what does this all mean when we synthesize the complete picture?
Well, Conor Benn's evolution from a fighter who barely survived a first-round knockdown against Cedric Peynaud into a highly explosive elite-level champion was not the result of discovering a single secret workout routine.
No, it was the result of systematically deconstructing the athlete. It required establishing a clinical baseline of his biological engine.
It required abandoning aesthetic vanity in favor of optimizing the kinetic chain for raw explosiveness.
And it required a ruthless adherence to managing central nervous system fatigue through precise daily sequencing and anti-inflammatory nutrition.
The VO2 max testing, the hexagonal trap bar deadlifts, the arcid landmine squats, the omega-3 rich pescatarian diet, and the strict 1 p.m. technical sparring sessions are all deeply interconnected gears in a single, unified machine designed to produce peak athletic performance.
And all of that massive foundational rewiring resulted in just a 2-pound difference on the scale.
It perfectly illustrates that the most profound transformations are systemic, not aesthetic.
Dan Lawrence summarized this entire evolutionary process with a brilliant philosophy regarding achievement. When he first assessed Benn's physical capabilities, if someone had suggested the fighter would eventually be pulling 170-kilo deadlifts at elite, half-meter-per-second velocities, Lawrence admitted he would have laughed.
The idea was biologically unthinkable at the time.
But now, that 170-kilo lift isn't a miraculous peak. It is simply the new required baseline. It's the standard operating procedure.
And this raises an important point based on Lawrence's perspective. He says, quote, "The summit keeps moving. If we get to the summit of Kilimanjaro, you better believe we're on to the next mountain, and the next one's higher."
If you apply that logic to your own life, whether you are optimizing your physical fitness, advancing in your career, or pursuing deep personal growth, it really shifts your perspective.
It does. If the absolute peak of your current mountain is destined to simply become the flat base camp for your next climb, how do you redefine what success actually means to you?
It's a heavy question. The realization that the destination is constantly moving forward means the adaptation process itself is the only true metric of success.
Absolutely beautifully said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of performance. Take a moment today to objectively measure your own baseline, define your own non-negotiable upper limits, and we will catch you on the next climb.